I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, after a historic vote in the Ukrainian parliament which sparked the country's biggest protest of the war, we assess the damage to President Zelensky's credibility following his decision to approve a bill many argue has gifted Putin a propaganda victory. Then we take you to Moldova, a nation on Europe's edge, with the first of a two-part dispatch that includes our clash with Russian-sympathising politicians outside of the Parliament building.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 23rd of July, 3 years and 151 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today, I'm joined by Ukrainian journalist and staff writer at The Spectator, Svitlana Morenets. But first, the major military and political updates of the past 24 hours. By far the most significant story today is President Zelensky signing into law what critics say will destroy the independence of Ukraine's anti-corruption institutions. The significance of this is profound on several levels, and Svitlana is here in the studio with me to discuss it shortly. But first, as is our custom, we'll start with the military situation. The skies above Ukraine were quiet last night, a rare respite from Moscow, which some wonder may be connected to the aforementioned bill. The maxim, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake, springs to mind. Kyiv is reported, though, to have carried out a wave of overnight drone attacks against Russia, including the targeting of a military-linked facility in Samara Oblast. The governor there said the drones were destroyed while attempting to strike an industrial facility, with mobile internet in the area restricted to assist efforts to neutralising them. A Ukrainian defence official said the target was the Novokubyshensk petrochemical company, a major facility that supplies raw materials, including the production of explosives like artillery shells, aerial bombs, cluster munitions and rockets. It remains unclear whether the facility suffered any damage. A logistical railway hub in Russia that connects key strategic directions was also hit. Those directions being Rostov-on-Don, Voronezh, Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad of course, and Kamensk-Shetinsky. Analysts claim the hub is used by the Russians to transport military equipment, ammunition and fuel for the Russian army in Ukraine. But again, it's very difficult for us to assess at this moment the scale of the damage. General Bogdanov, Ukraine's military intelligence chief, and so very much tapped in to Russian sources of information, has made an interesting interjection today, further to what he said relating to the bill, which we'll come to shortly. He said Russia plans to spend around $1.1 trillion on rearmament over the next 11 years in preparation for an even larger war, calling it the most ambitious weapons program since the collapse of the Soviet Union. He drew attention to the fact Russia has already created 2 new military districts, Moscow and Leningrad, and is preparing to form additional divisions and military units. He said the Kremlin's goal is not just regional domination, but a reshaping of the global order. Turning to the front lines, according to the Institute for the Study of War and others, Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups recently advanced into southern Pokrovsk as Russian forces continue to pursue their operational objective of seizing it. A source reportedly affiliated with the Ukrainian military intelligence stated the groups of unspecified size advanced into Pokrovsk through Zyrove a couple of days ago, and the Ukrainian forces are still searching for and destroying them. The ISW believes from troop movements that the Russian military is preparing to intensify assaults against the town in the near future, with advances northeast of Pokrovsk supporting the envelopment of the settlement by interdicting the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya highway and complicating Ukrainian egress routes. Now, the other interesting angle here is that an intelligence officer of the special forces operating there for the Ukrainians claimed attacking forces have varying equipment levels, the forces being Moscow, lacking weapons, helmets, plate carriers and bulletproof vests. But, crucially, that the number and quality of Russian first-person view drones has increased significantly. We can testify to that in our reporting, and again, I would point listeners to last Monday's episode where we did a deep dive into Pokrovsk, and of course, we've had Svitlana on the podcast before from her frontline reporting in that key sector. Also, in the battlefields of Donetsk, geolocated footage indicates Russian forces recently seized Lipove, north of Liman, and advanced southwest into eastern Torsk. There are also reports of Russian tank attacks there, of course a much rarer sight these days. Chasiv Yar has also seen some intense fighting, as has Toretsk, where there is evidence Ukrainian forces advanced northwest of Delivka, while the Russians made progress in northern Popov Yar, northwest of Toretsk, and into southern Polkavka. Away from that sector of the Eastern Front, let's turn northeast inside Kursk, Russia, where there has been a spike in the fighting in that small slither of territory still controlled by the Ukrainians. Russian mill-bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces renewed assaults toward Glushkovo and Takino. Southeast of there, back in Ukraine, Russian forces continued offensive operation in northern Kharkiv Oblast, but did not make advances. Two final quick military stories before we turn to the significant political developments. Colonel Maxim Kazban, commander of Ukraine's Fury Assault Brigade of the National Police, was killed in a car crash in Donetsk yesterday. He was a veteran officer who led a unique frontline formation made up of Ukraine's elite police forces. He'd taken part in some of the war's fiercest battles, with the head of the National Police calling his death an irreparable loss, describing him as a man of honour and courage, a true warrior and patriot of his country. And in another setback for the Ukrainians, one of its Mirage 2000 fighter jets crashed last night due to a reported failure of aviation equipment. The pilot was performing a flight mission at the time and reported an equipment failure before ejecting. The French-made planes were pledged in Ukraine in a military aid package announced in June 2024, arrived at the beginning of this year, and began repelling Russian aerial attacks in March. So those are the major military updates. But let's turn now to the potentially seismic events in the Ukrainian parliament. We left you yesterday with the breaking news that Ukrainian representatives had comfortably passed a bill which would subordinate the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, known as NABU, and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, known as SAPO, to the Prosecutor General, which activists and opposition lawmakers say will make it impossible for anti-corruption agencies to investigate top incumbent officials without approval from the government. Within hours of our broadcast, protesters were gathering in major cities across Ukraine to signal their anger at this move in what swiftly became the largest protest of the war. In the western city of Lviv, several hundred gathered by the statue of poet Taras Shevchenko, chanting "Shame" and "Corruption is the death of the future." In Kyiv, the thousands who gathered hoped to persuade Zelensky not to sign the bill into law, with particular anger targeting the head of his office, Andrei Yermak, who you'll recall has been heavily criticised recently, both domestically and internationally. But despite speculation that he might not, Zelensky did sign that bill, and in his nightly address to the nation said he had spoken with the heads of the independent anti-corruption bodies and the head of the security service. To quote him, "The anti-corruption infrastructure will work, only without Russian influence. It needs to be cleared of that, and there should be more justice. It is important that the Prosecutor General is determined to ensure that in Ukraine the inevitability of punishment for those who go against the law is actually ensured. This is what Ukraine really needs. The cases that have been lying dormant must be investigated. For years, officials who have fled Ukraine have been casually living abroad for some reason, in very nice countries and without legal consequences. And this is not normal. And there is no explanation why the Russians can still get the information that they need." But seeking to justify the move, as Zelensky did there, under the auspices of Russia having compromised those bodies, has not placated those who see this as a huge setback for Ukraine's progress, with some arguing the legislation will block Ukraine's European integration, since the functioning of independent anti-corruption institutions has been a key condition for the country's accession to the European Union. For context, these two bodies were created in 2015 as part of the reforms following the Euromaidan revolution, which ousted Yanukovych. Another fear is that this risks Ukraine's international reputation at a precarious moment. As one commentator put it, the Ukrainian parliament has handed Ukraine's enemies, east and west, a massive propaganda win. Already in the US, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of those fiercely critical of weapons deliveries to Kyiv, jumped on this story and the footage of the protests, posting, "Huge protests erupt in Kyiv against Zelensky, as he is a dictator and refuses to make a peace deal and end the war. Good for the Ukrainian people. Throw him out of office, and America must stop funding and sending weapons." Now, just to stress, those protests are not calling for a peace deal and an end to the war. I've heard from several journalists in Kyiv this morning who testified to that, but one can see that this information, this story, can be distorted and used to discredit the Ukrainian cause, as you just see in that example there. So why has this happened and why now? Well, there were previously arrests by the government of figures involved in anti-corruption legislation, as discussed yesterday. The speed of this has caught many by surprise. The bill was rushed through Parliament, with the relevant amendments added to an older bill that had previously passed the first reading. The Economist reports that the trigger for the bill may have been the opening of investigations into the dealings of presidential office insiders. As Christopher Miller of the Financial Times writes, to be clear, it was not the Rada, it was Zelensky and Yermak who organised this and pushed it through. Orders came from the office of the president last night, and the Law Enforcement Committee passed it early in the morning in such great haste that members had to join over video. Then MPs in Zelensky's ruling factions were told the boss was watching closely how they voted, so they fell in line. They were joined by former pro-Russian party MPs and Tymoshenko's party, as well as a few outliers from other opposition parties. It's worth noting that Zelensky's former foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, expanded the words of Russia's now world champion boxer, Alexander Usyk, posting after the bill's passing, "Don't push the horses, they kick back." General Bogdanov also weighed in, saying, "The nation will lose if it is torn apart from within. I'm certain that Ukraine will be saved by a strong military and strong institutions. We must show wisdom and responsibility." Now, that post, of course, can be read in multiple ways, both as a repudiation of figures in the government and as a warning to the public not to allow the issue to divide the country when it faces an existential threat from an external enemy. That is, of course, the real danger. As one observer put it, just a few days ago, Ukrainians were assuring me that whatever complaints they had about Zelensky, they understood the need for a united front in wartime. Now it's unclear whether Zelensky can still count on national unity, a scenario the Kremlin has long been hoping for. While today marks the latest round of talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians in Istanbul and a new prisoner exchange, this is the story of the day and may well be for some time to come, with more protests scheduled in Ukraine and, of course, more international reaction expected. But Svitlana, welcome back to the podcast. I want to measure your reaction to this. First of all, you were monitoring this as it was going through the parliament. What were your observations?
Thank you, Francis, for having me back on here. I was watching the live video from the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, yesterday as the MPs were voting for this bill. And I was shocked to see the behavior of MPs from Zelensky's party. They were laughing, cheering, applauding the bill, knowing full well that some of them are under investigation but by these very institutions. I will give you one example. Lyudmila Marchenko, an MP from Zelensky's party, she was exposed by NABU and SAPO for taking bribes to help men to flee the country in 2023. And they even released a video that was viral in Ukraine where she was trying to throw out the cash out the windows of her house when the investigators came to her house. And yesterday she voted for the bill that destroys these very institutions. So how is this possible? Why is she still in the parliament? Her case has been in court already for 2 years now without progress. And of course, when Ukrainians see such injustice, of course they get angry and they go to the streets to protest. Zelensky managed to do in one day what Russian propaganda couldn't do in almost 4 years of the full-scale war. He drove Ukrainians to the streets, protest against the government's policy. They pressed the green button, knowing very well that it would endanger Ukraine's chances to join the EU, because having anti-corruption institution, independent anti-corruption institution, is a key requirement. And you could see that people were comparing this law with the laws of Viktor Yanukovych in 2013, and there was a picture of the half-faced Zelensky, half-faced Yanukovych being viral on Ukrainian social media. And 2 days ago, I couldn't imagine even seeing that picture. And yesterday, it just became a reality, and people felt that the sacrifice of those protesters who died during Maidan Revolution, there were over 100 who were killed during protests, that it will be in vain if Zelensky just reverts all the progress that was done to fight corruption in Ukraine in these 11 years of war. And those few MPs who voted against it or abstained, there were 26 of them in total, they are in a complete minority. Anyway, they will try to gather signatures today to challenge this bill in court, and they need 45 MPs to put their signature under this document. And it's going to be very difficult for them, because even some of the MPs in Zelensky's party, even if they wanted to support it, they're being pressured from above, from Zelensky's office, not to do it.
I quoted the commentator earlier on saying that the danger for Zelensky now is that he no longer has the same level of unity in wartime as a consequence of this that he had before. I mean, do you think that he's politically threatened as a result of this?
I think he lost the support even of those people who were defending him all of this time that he is in power. And we will see his rating drop significantly in the coming weeks. It skyrocketed when he had that clash with Trump in the Oval Office to 67%, because Ukrainians felt that he was attacked and they were attacked as well, and he defended their dignity. But in this case, it seems that Zelensky and his office and his party were thinking only about themselves and about having the opportunity to steal and not to be punished for it. And everybody was waiting for Zelensky's night address last night for him to explain or to say. Everybody was hoping he will veto the bill. And like about 1 a.m., super late, it's not usual for him, he finally released the video and saying that he needs to eradicate the Russian influence in the NABU and in these anti-corruption bodies. But part of the MPs who voted for the bill were from former Russian parties in the Ukrainian parliament, because the Zelensky party doesn't have enough votes to pass the bills anymore, as they are 6 years in power. So he is using the Russian votes to pass his bills, but at the same time he talks about Russian influence in NABU. It was sad to see that, honestly, so disappointing in such a dark time for Ukraine, when Russians are already infiltrating Pokrovsk. And you could imagine how it is to hear for Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting and risking their life for Ukraine. And I hope they felt some ease seeing that Ukrainians in the rear, that they care and they will stand for them. And they went to protest despite the martial law, despite the big rain that was in Kyiv yesterday. Anyway, they decided that they can't let it slide.
Of course, Zelensky has spearheaded many anti-corruption initiatives in Ukraine. We've reported on them. We've reported on many people who have been arrested and charged in the Ukrainian government, including some who were close to Zelensky in previous years. But it would seem that this is, well, a very drastic step, and a step back, indeed, as articulated by some as we were just describing. But I'm just wondering, Svitlana, there are some who are trying to say that, this might be being misconstrued, misunderstood here. Is there a more generous offering that we can put forward here as to why Zelensky is doing this?
Honestly, it's hard for me even to try to find that explanation. I don't think exists. And I just think that the anti-corruption officers, they got too close to those in the Zelensky circle. And maybe I would like to quote the Vitaly Shabunin, one of the anti-corruption activists that was detained recently before he warned that this thing about Nabuh is going to start. And he said that for half of the year I was saying always, it is people in Zelensky's circle, it is not him. But now I will say it is him, because all of this can't go without his approval. So yeah, I'm afraid I can't justify it, and in the arguments that Zelensky provided today, I didn't find them believable, unfortunately.
Do you think the bill can stand? Do you think that international pressure might change things?
I think there is not enough pressure for now, and I reach as all Ukrainian civil society for our allies to really pressure Zelensky to cancel this bill. I read today in the European Pravda, it is Ukrainian media that reports on Ukrainian negotiations about joining the EU. And they said that this month the EU supposedly planned to open the first cluster of negotiations about Ukraine's accessions. Despite Orban's veto, anyway, they were going to do it. They were like, we don't care about Orban, we are going to start it because you are making all the reforms, it is your right, everything is going well. And it seems that it has been frozen. And I think it is entirely on Zelensky, and he will have to pay for it, because I think despite winning the war, there is also one more important thing for Ukrainians is to join the EU, to be part of the Western democratic world without corruption and not to be part of Russia. It's what this war is about. It's how it started. And when the Zelensky decisions are making that progress slower, or they canceling all of that progress, of course, Ukrainians are going to feel angry and they're going to go to the streets despite the war.
As you say, Ukraine's civil society has been really animated by this. Do you think that this is now the spark of something much bigger? Do you think this is going to continue? Or do you think this is a temporary protest action that's likely to be a flare-up rather than a profound shift?
I hope it doesn't come down until the bill is cancelled. I think the one positive conclusion that we can take from the events yesterday is that Ukrainians are still very proactive despite of the war. And you could see young people coming out to the streets. Those are 20, 25 years who were not in Maidan revolution. They just read about it. But anyway, they see that it is important to go out and express their opinion and push the government to make the right choices, and hopefully they will succeed. And before, Zelensky tended to care so much about his ratings, about his reputation. He would always do what people say. He would always release videos explaining that everything's gonna well, change the course. And it's strange seeing him not doing that. And even that meeting that he had today with the chiefs of the anti-corruption institutions, he didn't say he's going to cancel the bill. He said, we are going to develop a plan in 2 weeks and we are going to present it. But we heard a lot about these plans that Zelensky has, about the victory plan, and all those plans, they just disappeared. And even after that meeting, those chiefs of anti-corruption institutions, they released a statement saying that it doesn't change anything, that they can't work independently because of this bill. They can't investigate corruptions of senior officials because the prosecutor general appointed by Zelensky will have access to all of those cases. He can transfer them, he can shut them down. They can't work, basically. So I can see that they really didn't reach the agreement there. And it's interesting what Zelensky will do next, but tonight there will be protests in all the large cities in Ukraine, and I hope they're going to continue.
Well, thank you very much, Svitlana, for your time today. We'll certainly be returning to this story. And now we start our two-part dispatch from our time in Moldova, a nation on Europe's edge where the fight against corruption and Russian influence is also a very familiar one. Not all battles are fought with bullets. I'm in Chisinau, the capital city of Moldova, at a vital geopolitical crossroads on Europe's eastern flank. To its east is Ukraine, a country fighting for its very survival. To its west, Romania, a member of NATO and of the European Union. Moldova is a member of neither. And for many, that puts it in Putin's sights. If there is such a thing as Cold War II, this is the front line.
We are tired of being on the front lines. We want to be in the circle of European Union of peace.
We know where you live, we're gonna burn your house.
Mafia. These mafia.
Involvement of clergy, they are getting them to Moscow for pilgrimages. If your priest says that, most likely you're gonna see the world through the lens of Kremlin.
Everybody realizes that we are next after Ukraine.
Radu Marian is an influential MP from the ruling PAS party, which supports Moldova's bid to join the European Union. He's in his mid-30s, with a youthful but polished appearance, dark curly hair, clean-shaven, and donning a tailored suit. He's adjusting his tie after hurrying to see us between meetings. For part one of this two-part dispatch, I sat down with him in his office at the Ukrainian parliament to talk about the malign influence of Russia, something that, as you'll hear, became all too real just minutes after our conversation ended. Well, thank you very much for your time. Behind you is the flag of the European Union. I wonder if we could just start by you giving an outline of Moldova's relationship with Europe at this present moment.
Yeah, I think we have made huge progress in terms of EU accession. For us, joining the European Union is the most realistic path towards lasting peace and, of course, lasting economic growth. We are now in the negotiations for joining the European Union. 4 years ago, that would have been unthinkable, but because of the progress and reforms, but because obviously of the geopolitical situation, and the European Union realized that its stability depends on having a stable, Black Sea region and everything, and I think they changed also their focus. So we're very happy that this consensus in terms of what Moldovans want, and they want EU membership as soon as possible, and the European Union, which has an openness to welcome new members. So obviously I think the relationship with Moldova and EU now are at an all-time high, I would say.
You referenced the geopolitical situation. Why do Moldovans want to be more integrated with Europe now as opposed to, say, 10 years ago?
Well, first of all, it is a historic opportunity. There's a window opened, and this window opens, up every couple decades. The European Union now is open to accept new members. And also there is this pro-EU parliament, a president that supports that. The government, so everything is aligned towards the goal in Moldova and in the European Union. And besides the historic opportunity of joining the EU in the next 4 years, which is quite realistic, you have the once-in-a-generation threat from Russia, right? Because they've been so aggressive. They've always been aggressive towards Moldova when we were tilting towards the European Union, but now it's an unprecedented assault on our democracy and our election process and our information space. So it's a total hybrid war. They cannot attack us militarily, but they're throwing everything else. Energy, blackmail, buying hundreds of thousands of votes, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into propaganda. So Moldova on the front lines, we are tired of being on the front lines, right? We want to be in the circle of European Union of peace. It is a struggle, but we really hope once and for all, once we join the EU, to stop being in the front line. That's what we want.
In terms of the activities you described there, how much more severe has it become since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
It became much more severe. For example, the previous elections, presidential elections, it's been something that hasn't happened in another European country, where another country would try and buy hundreds of thousands of votes. We have recorded evidence of 140,000 people receiving money for voting in a certain way. That's around 8% of the electorate. You can do a lot with 8% in a country that is, democracy. It's always close to 50-50. That's one. Then in the fall of 2022, they tried to trigger a revolt. We have video evidence, and journalists were being undercover and security officers being undercover, of all this network of people being paid to come in and protest, young people who are being trained to trigger violence. We've had instances of young people trying to flame to church police cars and everything. That was their goal. So they stopped the gas flows to Moldova, hoping that we would freeze and everything. And then on top of that, these attempts to generate violence.
Relations are made more tense by Transnistria. The enclave, internationally recognised as part of Moldova, borders Ukraine, but is controlled by pro-Russian forces.
Last year, in the winter, they stopped the gas flows to Transnistria. That's so desperate. I mean, there are 200,000 Russian citizens there, and they stopped the gas flows to Transnistria, hoping that this will trigger a humanitarian crisis that will spill over to Moldova and triggering an instability in the country. They lost their biggest weapon of pressure in Moldova, and that is energy. We're not relying anymore on Russian gas. We can purchase natural gas from all around the world. And so they lost this, and they're trying something else. And at the end of this year, a new high voltage electricity line will be functional that will connect us to Romania. And so they will use the last little piece of potential pressure against us. And that is Tiraspol energy node. Because even though we buy electricity now from Europe or from other places, a part of it still goes through the Transnistrian node, because that's the way the Soviet energy infrastructure has been set up. So once this electricity lines is going to be functional at the end of this year, they're going to lose any way to pressure us in terms of energy. And this was used to be the biggest pressure point against us. But they're trying something else. They're trying vote buying, they're trying propaganda, they're trying to finance, political activity here. But they have less and less influence in Moldova. In 1998, more than 50% of our exports used to go to Russia. Now only 2%.
Do you think it is an irreversible shift, or do you think that this is, you described it as being a unique moment that comes every 20 years? I mean, do you see there being a potential for a tilt back east among the population at some point?
I think even in the United States, even in established democracy, you can say that democracy is in the rule of law, and they're not irreversible, right? So I don't think, even in the case of Moldova, democracy is reversible or European path. But I think we're getting very close to a point where it will be so much harder to tilt this country back to the east. There's going to be a fight between the good and evil, and between having a democratic and free and prosperous country and against having a country that is an annex to Russia. And I think we did steps in the last 3 decades, but I think joining the EU will be so important, so decisive in terms of making this closer to being irreversible, if I could call it like this.
You talked about all of the mechanisms of hybrid warfare that Russia has adopted. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine happened, did you believe, or do you still believe, that there was a prospect of some kind of military invasion of Moldova at some juncture, if Ukraine had fallen, for instance?
Look, back then, the first few days, obviously we thought about it. There was some panic here, lots of people were leaving the country. There was a bank run. We were having a meeting with the leadership of the country. What we're going to do, if Russians, come to Odessa, okay, should we, I don't know, tell everybody, all the Moldovans to come and have them block the entrance to Chisinau. I mean, there were all sorts of discussions about that. But everybody realizes that we are next after Ukraine. There's no hiding behind this. And we don't have a big army. We're not a big nation. And so Ukraine is not only fighting for itself, but for Moldova. Any help that the free world, the UK, US and Europe provides to Ukraine is also a help for Moldova. I think now it's quite unrealistic to have, military intervention in Moldova, because as you can see, they're quite far, from this area, and that's obviously extremely welcoming for us. Still, they could threaten us in different ways. We are not under a NATO umbrella. There are still threats.
At the heart of Moldova's constitution is a commitment to neutrality, but is being used by Russian sympathisers as an excuse to remain silent over the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The invasion has prompted discussions over whether Moldova being neutral makes the country less safe. It's for that reason that pro-European President Maia Sandu has hinted that the country may need to amend the constitution. You're talking about integration into the European Union, but do you think that is an adequate source of defence given the threats that are posed?
I think it's the most realistic way, because joining NATO, first of all, it's very hard because of constitutional breaks. It's incredibly hard to change the constitution on matters of neutrality. Like, look, Maia Sandu got the most votes ever for any political candidate. She got 1 million votes almost. So to change the constitution, then to make it, to remove neutrality, you would need, 1.4, 1.5 million. So that's just incredibly hard. And then you still have this decades-long propaganda during Soviet occupation and now of Russia, who is, telling all sorts of things about NATO. And you don't have so much support for NATO membership now. It's around 30-35% against, 60%, more than 60% that is for European Union. So I think it's just much more realistic for us to join the EU as a way to lasting peace rather than a NATO membership. I'm very happy to see that there's more and more discussion about, having a joint defense policy for the European Union. I think that's good for us, and it's a welcome step for us.
You mentioned President Sandu. How would you comment on her leadership during this time of crisis, and particularly in the way that she's tried to project Moldova's battles with Russia on the global stage?
Look, I think it takes so much courage to take a stand when you're small, when you're not under a NATO umbrella, to stand for what's right. That's a source of inspiration. And the way she led the effort to welcome the refugees. We had a flow of almost 1 million Ukrainians flowing through this country, and 100,000 are still in Moldova. The resources that we had to pull to do that, in the first few weeks of invasion, everything, all the government institutions stopped, the parliament, everybody worked with the refugees. MPs were, running refugee shelters, and for 2-3 months, nothing else worked. And because of her leadership, and she said, look, we have to help them, and we have to do that, because that's the humane thing to do. And, because we need to stand for what's right, even though that may be risky for us. To do that and to say these things, to be so emphatically against, tyranny and the dictatorship of Putin. And I think that's what's been so inspiring of her, and that's why so many people like her. Yeah, and the way she is able to attract funds and funding from our partners, and just helping Moldova, because as I said, we were not a big country, and we've been through so many shocks. So she's been instrumental in terms of gaining and having this credibility for this country. I think for the first time in decades, the world looks different at Moldova. It doesn't look as, some shady country that we used to be in the past, corrupt politicians and everything. It looks at a country that is either small but with a big heart, that it's doing the right things, that is able to stand against Putin, because we've had an incredible pressure during the elections that we stepped. And we won, Maia Sandu won, and the referendum, it was a small margin, but the threats were incredibly big. And then we stand up to that with our resources.
Was it that threat that led to that shift in internal attitudes in the country and the shift in mentality? Or were there other factors as well going on that led to this change in Moldova's political situation?
I think it was a big factor. It's true. Like in the second round of the elections, now we had a huge turnout from so many people that got scared of being run by Putin proxies. We did so much effort and progress into joining EU. It would have been, quite a setback. And so I think it's these both things that I said earlier. There's the historic opportunity, the realistic opportunity to join the EU in the next few years, and on the other hand, you have this huge threat. And then Moldovans, they were under Soviet occupation. We've had this history of being pressured by Russia, and I think it stands, and that's why, we look at what happened in Romania, a NATO country, EU member, where you still see a lot of voters who might vote for someone who's sympathetic to Putin. Lots of us here are a bit surprised. A lot of people in NATO countries, they don't realize how damn lucky they are of not having this constant threat behind your back. We always think of the threat, and that's why we want to kind of get rid of this, being on the front line always.
What was your reaction to the Romanian election result? It took a lot of people in the West by surprise.
The first round was a surprise, or the second round?
Well, I mean the second round, because people thought after the first round that it was most likely Mr. Syrian would get through.
Look, there are a million Romanian citizens in Moldova. The president is a Romanian citizen. I'm a Romanian citizen. So we as a party campaigned for Nicu Jordan. In Romania, they got this scare that we had in the second round. It's like, hold on, guys. I mean, we did so much, progressed so much in terms of economic growth, in terms of security. It would be crazy to just, to have someone who would undermine that. And I think that's why you had the largest turnout in elections since 1992 in Romania, because I think they also got scared of throwing all this away. And Nicu Jordan was right. Yeah, we need change. But, not a revolution, not to turn things upside down and throw to the garbage everything that, Romania accomplished in the last 30 years, the incredible economic growth they had. And I think that's why there was such a huge turnout in Moldova for the Romanian elections. And that's why there was such a huge involvement for our party, because, we risked. Because after the first round, everybody would say, the other guy, he was the favorite. But as we did in the last few years, we have to do what's right.
You mentioned that your political party campaigned for the... How does that work? Because people, I think, will be listening and thinking, well, hang on, Moldova's one country, Romania's one country. Is that not illegal? What does this mean?
We have a million, almost, more than 40% of the population is Romanian citizen. We used to be one country. So many people in this country, in Moldova, want union with Romania. They don't necessarily think this is, to being two separate countries. We have the same language, same history, lots of the same. So it's so different.
Do you think that reintegration with Romania will ever happen?
I don't know. I think the logical first step is to join the EU and then, have this de facto, you have to have bridges, to have electricity connections, to have the same economic space and everything. And then we'll see. I think this has to be decided through a referendum at one point, I believe. Because you still have lots of people who are against. So you need to.
Would you be in favour?
Personally, yes. Yeah. I think the support for a union in Romania now is around 40%. Yeah, but it needs to be with the referendum. You cannot force this. But we're focused now. We are citizens of Moldova. We are state officials of the Republic of Moldova. And we're 100% dedicated towards helping our country, Moldova, to go forward, to join the EU membership, and this is where we're totally focused right now.
Can you just explain the role of Transnistria and the complexities around that part of the region?
Look, we had that war in 1992. It's what happened in 2014, what's happening now. Russia did the same thing, bringing in some troops and...
Little green men.
Yes, green men, exactly. We have to, at one point, do this reintegration. I think the war in Ukraine has accelerated that. The only reason that Transnistria existed in the last 30 years is because they received free gas from Russia. And that's why their industry is still competitive, and they were able to sell us electricity because it's just cheaper than the market. So we used to purchase it. Starting January 1st, 2025, we're not buying electricity anymore from Transnistria. So they're in big trouble. They don't have the extra cash. I think it's just a matter of time. I don't see how that region can economically exist for a longer time. It will cost us, though. It will cost us lots of money to do this reintegration, at least $500 million a year in the first few years. And moreover, you have the situation with the brainwash that happened for these decades. You have 300,000 people that eventually would have to vote in Moldova. It's a very complicated matter.
What do you think the process would be of that reintegration? Because presumably Russia still has, as you say, would have a lot of influence over there, and this also is relevant to Ukraine as well, because of course it has regions that have been annexed for period of time and the same concerns. So this is relevant not only for Moldova's future and for Europe's future, but for Ukraine's as well, which is why I'm interested.
Yeah, look, I think, again, it's a matter of time. I don't see how this will be tolerated. To have this gray zone, the Ukrainian nation will prevail and we will have a lasting peace. With Ukraine and Moldova, anchored in the European Union, it will be hard to keep this as a status quo, so there's going to be a resolution to that. I believe it has to be peaceful. Russia will try to do stuff, to try to keep things in the way, but even they don't want to spend much money on that anymore, Only in gas, they have spent $9 billion in the last 3 decades just to give them free gas. So this would also test their patience. So this has to be sorted out in a diplomatic way, but we have to figure out a transition period. What do we do there? What do we do with the media space, with the information space? I think it's unthinkable to just have this in a split second. You cannot make it sudden.
Just before we come to the end, because I know you've got to dash to a committee meeting, I was speaking to a member of the Hungarian cabinet, and his attitude towards sanctions and specifically energy, which you've referenced a lot, is that it's hurting Europe, it's hurting European friends far more than it's hurting Russia. What's your perception here in Moldova on the question of the impact of sanctions and the war on Russian energy?
Look, we were dependent on Russian energy sources for quite a long time. And I can tell to Europe that it's such a strategic mistake to rely only on one source, particularly on Russia. In whole Europe, they're not respecting the international rules. They can, stop the gas flows in a second if they don't like where your country goes. So it's so foolish to rely on that. And I think you cannot, you have to diversify. And I think, yes, in some way we have to put pressure on Russia in a way or another. Moldova doesn't have that many ways to pressure us because we're not that big, but I think Europe has, and US, and you have to put pressure on Russia to end this bloody war. We see that they're affected. I disagree when they say, this is not affecting Russia. It does. Look at Gazprom. They're losing so much money, billions of dollars every last 3 years. It's affecting them. Their deficits and the inflation and their loan market is looking really bad. The credit market is quite unstable. So this economic pressures need to continue. And support for Ukraine, military and economic and everything.
Last question, something a little bit lighter to end. You said that you studied in Edinburgh, the United Kingdom. Share any memories of that time and its importance for you as a Moldovan spending time in the UK?
Yeah, it makes me nostalgic. It was just amazing. Being in such an amazing city, so beautiful country. In the UK, I traveled a lot. And for us, when we go to UK, we're in awe of it. Even though, you have your problems and everybody has its problems. But I think it takes sometimes a guest, a foreigner, to tell you how damn beautiful and nice is that place. And it's great. And the university and the world-class education system that you have and the services and the public services and the healthcare that you have. I think sometimes when you feel that you're down, you have to be thankful for what you have. And I can tell you that UK has so many things to offer to the students, but to the world.
Well, sorry that we brought the bad weather with us.
Oh, it's fine. No, we like it. I like it. So it's good for the agriculture and everything.
Like being in Edinburgh, as you were saying. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
During our interview, a protest suddenly began outside the Parliament building we were in. It was organised by the pro-Russian Heart of Moldova Republican Party, who were keen to speak up in favour of neutrality. What does that mean to you, neutral? Because for many, Moldova is a front line politically between East and West.
Партиду Републиканії Молдови є партиду печі.
The Republican Party Heart of Moldova is the party of peace, is the party of neutrality. We want to preserve our sovereignty, neutrality, and simply take care of our people in our country.
What is your personal attitude towards President Sandu?
She destroyed our country.
Destroyed it?
Yes. Он пришли, который деструс царь.
She is a president who destroyed our country, simple, together with the PAS top team.
What is your attitude towards Ukraine at the moment?
It's worse here than in Ukraine. In Ukraine, there's war and it's explicable. But we don't have war and yet people are fleeing. We don't have an economy, just like in Ukraine.
It was quite something to hear Moldova being compared to war-torn Ukraine. Protesters left as quickly as they'd arrived, and the whole event seemed to be more of a pre-planned PR stunt than a protest. Where have all the protesters gone? Tomorrow, you'll hear part 2 of our Moldovan dispatch, which includes Dom's encounter with the protesters and my interview with the co-founder of a pro-democracy think tank who describes in more detail how Russia is seeking to influence Moldova. Stay tuned. Well, thank you very much, Svitlana, for your insights on this complicated but very important story. Let's turn to our final thoughts now. Do you have any thoughts remaining on the subject of the day or on another subject?
I think I would like to... There was one poster yesterday at the protest saying my father didn't die for this. And I think it touched me so much because I think Ukrainians already lost so much and so many people died and suffered so much. And I think Zelensky should change the course. He still has that option. He can't pretend that it was a big mistake. He is very sorry for that and to cancel the bill. And maybe Ukrainians are gonna forgive him just for a while. To be honest, I think if he tries to go to the next elections, everybody will remember this to him and it's not gonna help him. But he has still the option to reverse everything. And I hope he does it, because if not, I think Ukraine gets in a really dangerous position when we have to fight two wars, one outside of the aggressor from outside and one from the inside. And it's very dangerous. And as history shown, when Ukrainians start fighting between themselves, they can lose everything.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Dom Nichols and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine Live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Alexis Adimora. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.